You've probably seen the headline already: Mysterious Virus Linked to Cruise Ship Investigation. And if you're like most people over 50, your reaction probably went in one of two directions almost immediately. Either, "This sounds serious," or, "This is probably another overblown media story." But here's the problem with both reactions: neither one actually prepares you. Because what matters is not panic, and it's not dismissal, it's understanding exposure. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why infectious disease experts are approaching this situation very differently from the way most headlines are presenting it. You'll understand what this virus family actually is, how exposure typically happens, why experts keep emphasizing specific environments instead of public panic, and most importantly, what genuinely increases personal risk and what probably does not. And there's one concept I need you to hold on to for the next few minutes, because it changes everything. I call it the invisible exposure problem. Once you understand that idea, the entire story suddenly makes more sense. Because the part creating concern among experts is not what most people think it is. Stay with me. First, let's establish the foundation, because right now, most people are operating with almost no accurate context at all. This is not a newly discovered virus appearing out of nowhere. The virus being discussed belongs to a family researchers have studied for decades. Scientists first identified major strains many years ago, and infectious disease specialists already understand a great deal about how these viruses behave. That distinction matters enormously, and here's why. Whenever you hear about an outbreak, the first question should never be, "How scary does this sound?" The first question should be, "Is this something experts already understand?" Known viruses behave differently from completely new ones. With known pathogens, scientists usually understand how exposure happens, which environments matter, what symptoms to monitor, and which precautions actually reduce risk. That's completely different from the uncertainty that exists during truly novel outbreaks. Now let's move into the part most people are misunderstanding right now. Many people automatically assume this virus spreads easily through ordinary human contact. Shared air, public places, walking past someone, being in the same room. But for most known strains in this virus family, that is not considered the primary exposure route experts focus on. Instead, the concern is linked to rodent-contaminated environments. And this is where the invisible exposure problem begins. The virus may be associated with rodent waste in enclosed spaces: garages, cabins, barns, storage rooms, basements, old sheds, or buildings closed for long periods. Over time, contaminated material can dry out. Then someone opens the space, starts sweeping, moves old boxes, disturbs dust. And tiny airborne particles may become suspended in the air without any obvious warning sign. No smell, no visible cloud, no immediate symptom. The person walks away feeling completely normal. That's what makes this different psychologically. The exposure itself can feel invisible. And that's why awareness matters so much more than panic. Because generalized fear doesn't help people identify real exposure situations. Specific awareness does. Now, if you ever need to clean an enclosed area where rodent activity may have occurred, experts consistently recommend a careful sequence. Ventilate first. Open windows and doors and allow airflow before beginning cleanup. Second, avoid dry sweeping or aggressively stirring dust into the air. Third, many professionals recommend protective equipment like properly fitted masks during cleanup. And fourth, use disinfecting solutions and wet cleaning methods instead of dry cleaning approaches. Simple precautions matter. And honestly, most people never think about any of this until they suddenly realize an old garage or storage unit may actually fit the risk scenario experts describe. Now let's talk about symptoms, because this is where timing becomes important. One reason this virus family gets attention is because early symptoms may resemble common illnesses at first. People might experience fatigue, fever, muscle aches, headaches, or general exhaustion. And that's part of what makes exposure history so important. Because without context, many people simply assume they're dealing with something routine. But healthcare providers evaluate symptoms differently when there's known exposure to rodent-contaminated environments. That single detail can completely change how doctors approach testing and monitoring. Now here's the part headlines usually fail to explain properly. Severity and population-level risk are not the same thing, and understanding that distinction changes how rational people respond to health news. A condition can be serious, while still remaining relatively uncommon overall. According to health authorities, general population risk remains low because exposure usually depends on very specific environmental circumstances, not ordinary daily interaction. That's a critical distinction. This is not the type of situation where experts are describing widespread casual transmission through everyday public contact. And honestly, that fact alone should immediately lower the panic level many people feel after reading dramatic headlines. But, and this matters, low population risk does not mean zero individual risk, because individual risk depends entirely on personal exposure context. And this is where many people make mistakes. The people most likely to ignore useful precautions are often the people who hear, overall risk is low, and mentally disengage completely. But if you work in construction, agriculture, forestry, pest control, wildlife management, property restoration, or regularly enter old enclosed structures, your situation is different. If you own a cabin, barn, shed, storage unit, or unused basement with possible rodent activity, this conversation becomes much more personally relevant. Your environment matters more than generalized headlines, and that's the point most media coverage skips entirely. Now there's another layer to this that experts pay attention to very carefully: timing. Because symptoms do not necessarily appear immediately after exposure. There can be a delay between exposure and the first noticeable symptoms. And during that period, the person usually feels completely normal. That's what makes awareness so valuable. Panic after symptoms appear is far less useful than understanding exposure before symptoms begin. And if someone develops significant symptoms after possible exposure, communicating that exposure history clearly to healthcare providers becomes extremely important. Not vague information, specific information. For example, I recently cleaned a rodent-contaminated garage. That detail matters. Now let me say something directly to adults over 50 watching this. Your overall immune resilience matters more than most people realize. Sleep quality matters. Nutrition matters. Vitamin deficiencies matter. Chronic inflammation matters. Many people treat immune health like background noise until a health headline suddenly appears. But the body responds best to consistent habits, not last-minute panic. That means regular sleep, movement, healthy body weight, routine medical care, and discussing deficiencies with your physician when appropriate. None of that sounds dramatic, but long-term health rarely depends on dramatic things. It depends on repeated daily behaviors. I recently heard from a man named Richard, age 68, who said this information completely changed how he handled cleanup at his hunting cabin. Instead of immediately sweeping the space after winter, he ventilated the area properly, wore protection, and cleaned slowly and carefully. Another viewer, Elaine, age 63, realized her basement storage room had clear signs of rodent activity she had ignored for years. That's what awareness looks like. Not panic, not obsession, just smarter decisions. So let me close with the most important takeaway from this entire discussion. You do not need to panic. You do not need to avoid normal daily life. And you do not need to assume every alarming headline represents widespread public danger. But you do need situational awareness. Understand the environments experts actually associate with higher exposure risk. Use proper precautions in enclosed spaces. Pay attention to symptom timing if exposure occurs. And take your health seriously, without letting fear control your thinking. Because informed awareness protects people far better than emotional reactions ever will. If this video gave you clarity instead of confusion, share it with someone who may only be hearing panic without context. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay tuned, because next week we're going to talk about several overlooked habits that may help adults over 50 support immune resilience and overall health as they age.